Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Celebrating Cinema, a podcast for the love of cinema. I'm your host, Gommans, and you can probably hear that I have a cold, so I'm sitting at an appropriate distance from my colleagues Hugo Emmerzael.
Hey, everybody.
On this review roundup, we're going to be discussing some new releases dropping in the second half of February and let you know what we thought. We really loved hearing from you in the comments on our last episode, so do get in touch with us on social media at Lab111 or find us in the comments on Spotify. We read it all. We really love to see it. Make sure you get your hands on some tickets for our next Celebrating Cinema Film Club. We're going to be screening Todd Haynes' glam rock extravaganza Velvet Goldmine on the 27th of February, and we discussed it on last week's deep dive on musical biopics. That was really fun. Hugo and I are both huge fans of this movie, so make sure you're there. You'll find the link for that in the show notes. So today we're going to be discussing a couple of new movies. We're going to be talking about Caught by the Tides. We're going to be talking about Osgood Perkins' The Monkey and All We Imagine as Light. I think the first one we're going to be discussing is Caught by the Tides. I think this is going to be one of those classic ones that Hugo and I probably have very differing opinions about.
Okay, let's go. I'm interested to see that.
I wonder. I mean, I feel like I know you well enough to maybe feel like we think differently about this. Hugo, can you tell me a little bit about this movie and what it's about?
Okay, so Caught by the Tides is a new film by Jia Zhang-ke, Chinese director from what they call the sixth wave of Chinese new cinema, who started making films in the 1990s, but mostly made these tremendous films at the beginning of the 21st century. One of those films, for instance, is called Still Life, and it's about these huge infrastructure changes that are being established in China, including the building of the Three Gorges Dam. And this dam, when it was being built, flooded an entire region of the land, displacing a lot of people from their villages and small towns, etc., etc. So why I'm saying all this is that Jia Zhang-ke kind of like captures these events in real time as they unfold and overlays some narrative over it, usually some complicated emotional dramas about maybe a man and a woman who are trying to reconnect or find each other. And while he was making these kind of films that oversee basically or observe this rapidly developing Chinese history into the modern future, he was collecting more and more material. For over 22 years, if I'm not mistaken, he was filming stuff, collecting B material from the old films that he had made, archival stuff, and in Caught by the Tides, finally he adds it into one, you could say, free-flowing narrative about a woman, again, searching for her lost love. And as she does this search, this quest, you see basically 20 years of China passing over the screen in these kind of very, for me at least, poignantly beautiful and poetic floating images. So I'm saying all this because the narrative in the film itself is not very strong or pronounced. It's mostly in the way that the film flows in this duration of time that you can see passing basically in real time. So I thought it was very exciting, but I'm quite curious, Laura, since you prefaced it in that way, what you thought of the film.
This is the type of movie that Elliot also announced to me when it's like, we're going to be watching this. You're probably going to be having a hard time. I mentioned this a lot. My attention span is about 15 minutes. This is the kind of movie that I feel like there isn't really a narrative to grasp onto. Like if you read about it, it says it's about a man and a woman trying to reconnect. And like, it's barely there. There's like one scene where she scooches up next to him and then he goes, meh. And then 15 scenes happen of like, slow pans of people smoking a cigarette. And then it's slow pans of a landscape. And then it's a cassette tape on the ground. It's discarded. Maybe this is a metaphor for technology changing. And then there's one scene where she's walking. And then there's one scene where she's like getting up from a bench and he pushes her back down about 25 times. So the narrative to me, like it's a silent movie basically. There's barely any.
Well, that's what the director, sorry to interject, but that's so true. Like that's what the director also told me when I interviewed him in Cannes, where it premiered last year. And again, it made a huge impression on me there. he said that he was very much inspired by silent cinema, and that the biggest reference point that he had was Dziga Vertov's A Man with a Movie Camera, a film from the Soviet Union in the early 20s that uses all of these associative montage techniques to basically make a composite or almost a symphonic symbolization of the empire and the Soviet Union. A very poetic and beautiful and flowing film. So what Jia Zhang is that he wanted, like, the working title of Caught by the Tides was Man with a Digital Movie Camera. And he wanted to do somewhat of the same thing. And that's also why there's almost no dialogue in the film, because he didn't know what the narrative was going to be except for these poetic imageries that he was collecting. As a matter of fact, he told that he only started editing this film during COVID because he was in a lockdown and had time on hands and almost more than 2 decades of material to sort through. And that he just very slowly processed all of these things and described it as basically finding the coherence in a group of passing clouds. That was the metaphor that he used for it.
Right.
So it makes sense that it feels like this poetic silent film. But if
Yeah,
that's not your cup of
I can
tea,
see that it is very poetic, and it is this thing that's like, oh, it's like a film that I would see like in a museum more than, you know. And I get that that's beautiful, and some of the images are incredibly beautiful, and it is cool to kind of go from what is it, like the early 2000s to now within the time span of one movie. I just couldn't really find a way to connect with it. I think because it just is too much of a blank canvas, where I've been reading about it and it's like, it could be about this, and it could be about this, and it could also be about this, and it could also be about this. And that to me is just a little bit difficult because, yes, I do believe that the director was intentional in putting these images together, but it could also just kind of feel like a bit of an afterthought. It's like, oh, I had these images laying around. I might want to go to Cannes. Would be nice.
fair enough. Yeah, well,
That's a really like mean take on it, but it is kind of like, who decides that this is some like...
Well, that's the entire tension of a film like this. It's such an incredibly fine line between somewhat transcendental poetry or just maybe pure pretension. And that really is also in the eye of the beholder. For me, it kind of stood out in Cannes because at least it takes this narrative to the backseat, whereas many of the main films in these huge film competitions, they are very narrative focused and they really, are about the intricacies of the plot. I think your mileage very much varies on this film, and this, like you astutely observed, sits right up in my alley for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely one that's not for everyone. It is very much because he's a very like heralded director who's done stuff in the past that has made huge waves. I get that we can look at this and be like, wow, this is a collection from his work. And but to me, it was a little bit chin strokey. That's how I feel.
On a completely different note, something much more maybe kinetic in a different way. The Monkey by Osgood Perkins.
The coroner said it was an accident, but it was no accident. It was a monkey. When I was a kid, my twin brother and I found something that loved to kill. I did everything I could to make it go the fuck away. But it had other plans.
Laura, what's the vibe there?
So, for those of you who don't know, The Monkey is a new, like, goofy horror movie. It's an adaptation of a Stephen King short story, and it's written and directed by Osgood Perkins, who we, of course, remember did Hugo's favorite movie of last year, Longlegs.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. Hugo did not like Longlegs.
At all.
But it's about one of those, like, classic, like, monkeys with a drum, and it comes in a box, and it says... like life. It doesn't say life, it says like life. And that's going to come into play. Trust me.
I see.
And it basically comes into the hands of these two kids whose like father we see in the beginning. That's a fun little cameo that I won't spoil. But basically what happens every time you turn the thing on this monkey, someone dies. Could be anyone. And they die in a very early 2000s
Final Destination,
really gory, really gruesome type of way.
I love those films, by the way, so much. The Final Destination films.
You might love The Monkey. So I didn't hate it, but it was very different from what I expected, and the way it's marketed is very much as like a horror gory, and it is very gory. But the weird thing about this one is that it really wants to go for comedy in a way that doesn't really rhyme with anything Osgood Perkins has done before this, except star in Legally Blonde. But
That's a deep cut.
That's a deep cut. But it does this thing where it has this tone of almost like a Will Ferrell movie, or maybe even, and I say this completely derogatorily, Ryan Reynolds movie, where it's just like so jokey and and then there's this like gruesome kill. Because of this tone, it doesn't really have any levity, and it just feels like a weird crossover between like a Goosebumps episode and Final Destination and Saw and The Babadook and like all of these things.
Well, I have a question about this because Longlegs is a film that I hate with a passion because I didn't believe it for any single second. And that's a film that plays a lot with this very grave, serious horror tropes. And it takes itself, for me, overtly serious, right?
Yeah.
Like from the establishing shot of this like
I
old
love
camera
like
format.
I
and
didn't
this, like,
love Longlegs, but I did love the establishing shot.
Okay. This shot immediately gave me the idea that I was going to watch something absolutely awful that I was never going to believe. And the rest of the film only confirmed that for me. But this seems like an interesting inverse or opposite of that maybe this film takes itself too lightly for your taste, or maybe it just doesn't know how to execute the landing of this comedy horror crossover.
I think that's a problem for me. It never feels like there's any like real gravity to any of the kills. It is again about generational trauma because apparently he has
every
some
horror
generational
movie.
trauma to work through. But I kind of felt like it was trying to do too much, and then it just like didn't hit with me enough. Like the tone for me was just weird at times. Yeah, I didn't really connect with it. I had a good time. There was some like laughs, and some of the kills are very creative. But yeah, tonally, it was a little bit weird to me. It starts off like very much like almost Spielberg-y. You know, it's these two kids, they're twin brothers, they find this monkey and then it's like, whoa, fuck. And then it's like, it almost feels like a kid's movie until someone's like guts get ripped out. Which could be entertaining.
Yeah, you're almost selling it to me, which is interesting.
Hey.
Yeah.
Watch Hugo love this movie. So yeah, for me, I never really connected with it. Theo James is the lead character as the grown-up twins. I think he does an okay job at not making it too Ryan Reynolds-y, because that's just a tone that I can't stand. It didn't really land for me, and I don't know that it knew how to do a third act. It was just kind of like,
well, this was
cool.
Longlegs for me all over again as well.
Oh, the third act in Longlegs was
absolutely
terrible, and I think this is
insane.
Osgood Perkins's problem, where he's like, I have this really insane concept, definitely gonna make this work, and it's like, okay, so then what happens to the monkey? Yeah, because like we can't destroy it, right? No. Well, we'll see.
We'll see. Let's just do it.
It definitely does that thing.
Well, I have to say one thing about it that I do appreciate is that some of these films are, getting a lot of hype and a lot of attention, and that at least they are an original idea or from an original script, right? Even if it doesn't really work that well, I'm still appreciative of the fact that these kind of weirder horror films that still make a big splash do make it to the cinemas, because
Definitely.
we need more of those all the
And
time.
I do also have to say, I enjoyed myself. I do like most Stephen King adaptations more than a lot of other horror movies that are coming out in big cinemas, getting big releases, the big, like, quiet bang ones. And there's definitely a lot more to this than most of those. So I guess that's a plus. It was a good, like, romp. It was a good popcorn, fun morning that I had.
We've sandwiched it very well between the two more serious films of
Yes.
this episode. Yeah.
Maybe a different order would have been appropriate. That's what we thought of. That's what I thought of The Monkey. Hugo's still yet to see it, and I can't wait to hear what you think when you
people will
finally
know.
do. They'll know.
People will know.
People will know. That moves us into the next movie, which is called All We Imagine as Light.
இந்த மாயை நம்பணும் இல்லைன்னா உனக்கு பைத்தியம் பிடிச்சிடும்
ഭാവിയെ പറ്റി ചിന്തിക്കാറുണ്ടോ?
हम दोनों का सेम है सिस्टर एकता जो सदा से ऐसा
That's a new release by Payal Kapadia, Indian director, and she won the Grand Prix at Cannes last year. You were there. How was that? Did you see it there?
I saw it there, and well, I have a mixed reception of this film, but I remember very clearly watching the beginning of it and being completely immersed because it's a film that takes place in Mumbai. It follows these three nurses that kind of intersect in their lives into each other, and they develop, let's say, an interesting bond over some shared feelings and ideas and sense of loss and belonging, etc. All of these things. But before the narrative really settles, you have these like subterranean, crawling, almost documentary shots of the city at night and this rumbling, uncanny, but very hypnotic score over it. And I was like, okay, this is going to be incredible. This is insane. This is so awesome. Like, like this kind of like nightlife version of God by the Tides, right? Like I'm immediately flowing into the film. So I was initially incredibly enthusiastic. And then when it settles more in its somewhat poetic, melodramatic mode of these three women and how they navigate their lives, it loses steam for me at the end, or it loses some kind of poignancy and urgency that I felt at the beginning of the film. So I would have a very nuanced kind of relationship with the film, that I admire it for so many of the choices that are in there, and also kind of find myself grasping at more of that while something entirely else is playing out.
Yeah. So just to catch you up on the story, if you haven't read the synopsis about these three nurses, and basically the main one, I guess, Prava, she is married to her husband, but he lives in Germany, and he has been in Germany for like 10 years, right after they got married. And then all of a sudden, they haven't been in contact for a year at least. And then like a rice cooker shows up at her door, and it's made in Germany. So they just assumes like, wait, my husband sent me this. That is so weird. Like, we haven't been in touch.
So incredibly painful as well.
So incredibly painful. And you can really see like she's a very wistful person.
Yeah.
She receives this rice cooker, and you can basically start, you see that triggering her. Is like, what am I doing with my life? This fucking man, I haven't talked to him in so long. What is he doing? And then her roommate is a younger nurse called Anu, and she has fallen in love with a Muslim boy, and she's Hindu, and she's set to be in an arranged marriage, and she doesn't want to. So she's sneaking around the edges of town trying to find a place to hang out with her boyfriend and be intimate for real. But she's very full of life, and she's like dancing around the living room. It's very obvious that she is living, and then Prava's like wistfully looking at her in a corner.
Rice cooker.
With a rice cooker. And then there's a third older nurse named Parvati, and her husband died, and she is getting kicked out of her apartment because of gentrification in Mumbai. So they're all struggling with their own thing, and I feel like it's about how Prava looks at these other two women struggling with these things, but also taking ownership over, hey, I want to be with this man. I don't want an arranged marriage. And this older woman, Parvati, losing her husband, but just being like, I'm going to move back to my hometown, and I'm going to be a cook, and I'm going to like walk into the ocean and not kill myself, but like enjoy the waves and feel the life. And then all Prava does is like wistfully look at these things happening. I kind of had the opposite reaction, where it started as like, oh God, this is not going to be another one of those.
Okay, we're getting to the heart of something here, that I maybe have a bigger desire for these films that want to step out of these narrative constraints and kind of let themselves flow in this maybe unidirectional kind of vibe-based approach. That's very interesting.
Yeah, because like I noticed myself being like, okay. And then towards the end, I started liking it a lot more. When it also introduces, and I won't spoil anything, but it also starts to introduce some narratives where it's like, wait, is this real life? Is this her fantasy? Is she hallucinating? Is this person hallucinating? And that's where it's like, oh, they're starting to do something interesting, because before that, it's very much just like a slice of life.
Exactly.
These three women, which is also, by the way, very unique for an Indian movie to focus on these like three women that are very like liberated in their own sense, or yearning for liberation, and it's not men fighting. And what I understand, there was also quite a lot of controversy about this film in India.
Exactly, and also it not being submitted on behalf of India for the Oscars, for instance, which for the international film community was an absolute shock, because which other Indian film is on such a top spot in the Cannes Film Festival winning this award? Also, the fact that she came from documentary filmmaker, which also explains this opening maybe, and how she fuses that with fiction and also this kind of magic realist poetic dimension. It is very impressive.
I think it was submitted on behalf of France. Do you know a little bit more about what happened there?
Well, it was shortlisted to be submitted by France, but in the end they went for the little film that
doink.
almost could all, Emilia Perez.
Another one of your favorites.
Oh, yes.
Another thing that I really noticed about this one is it reminded me of something Robert Eggers said recently, where he's like, I can't ever make a movie set in modern times because if I have to film a phone, I will throw up. And I was like, I love that, because one thing that always really irks me in like all of these like Netflix movies mostly is how they represent text messages happening.
Exactly, yeah,
And
that's
it's
so
like
true.
this interface comes up in a screen and maybe it's floating and maybe it's a little bit see-through. Here, I love that they just went for like an orange font in the middle of the screen and it just shows up as titles, these texts, and I thought that was so cute.
It's so beautiful as well.
I was like,
Aesthetically
oh,
very
finally
pleasing.
someone found a way to do text and not make me gag. I thought that was really lovely.
That's so sweet. That's so true.
So yeah, all in all, I did connect with this a lot more than, for example, Caught by the Tides. I thought it was quite lovely, a little slice of life of these women. Not my favorite of the year, but I definitely recommend seeing it. It feels kind of liberating.
No, liberating is the exact right word, because it takes so many interesting choices. So even, if not all of them work for you personally, I think there's so much to explore in a film with this richness and density while still having this beautiful, somewhat in the midst of that melodrama, very optimistic and hopeful perspective on all of these life situations that these women are facing. And I thought this gentleness in the end is what's going to stick with me the most as well. So yeah, of course, you have to watch All We Legend Is Light.
I want to bring up one more February release that we haven't talked about very briefly. I don't know if you've seen the new Bridget Jones.
Not yet. No.
As of now, we're not going to be screening it at Lab 111, but I do want to mention it briefly because I thought it was quite adorable.
You were at the premiere as well,
I was
right?
at the premiere.
How was
Renee
that?
Zellweger was there. It was it surprised me because I felt like the first one, obviously masterpiece, amazing. Second and third, a little bit meh. And then this fourth one, I think, comes in as more of something that deserves to exist by itself. It's about grief, not really a spoiler because it happens in the first 5 minutes, but Mr. Darcy dies.
Oh no.
And then it's about how she deals with the grief, how her kids deal with the grief, how she as a mother has to do that, has to like start dating again. And I felt it was pretty like heartfelt and nice. And yeah, I was just glad that it wasn't shit.
Sometimes those movies can be even more accurate or interesting in how they depict these huge emotions, because they just give so much of it, and there's such a directness and bluntness in it. It can be incredibly insightful.
More suitable for the Lauras of the world who need a narrative like idiots. So definitely make sure to check out the movies we mentioned and let us know what you thought of them.
Exactly. People need to join in on this huge debate that we're having here.
Yes. We're not going to poll because I know I'll probably lose. But yeah, definitely let us know what you think through either social media at Lab111 or in the Spotify comments or in any comment section you'll find us because we're chronically online. So as I mentioned in the intro, you can definitely get tickets for our next Celebrating Cinema Film Club where we're screening Velvet Goldmine. It's going to be awesome. Hugo's going to do an intro.
Hell yeah, let's fucking go.
You don't want to miss it. We also have a pretty amazing David Lynch program on at Lab 111 right now. So if you felt a little embarrassed when he died, when you were like, oh, I'm not sure if I saw all the movies that I had wanted to see, or if you just want to revisit his amazing work on the big screen, just show up to Lab 111 and we'll make that happen for you. One big February release that we didn't talk about this time is A Complete Unknown, and that's because we covered that in great detail
extensively
last week on our episode about musical biopics. So if you're interested to hear our opinion on that one, make sure to check out last week's episode. We did a huge retrospective episode of Celebrating Cinema about his work. So if you want to listen to that, you can definitely find the link in the show notes.
If you love what we do, support us by leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us climb the ranks of the podcast charts. And don't forget to check the show notes for all the films mentioned, bonus info, and ticket links. This was a Lab 111 production, edited and produced by Elliot Bloom, with music from Hugo Emmerzael and artwork from Studio FFF.